This President's Day weekend, which of our former chief executives was the worst ever?
Barack Obama.
Presidential historians have been making a list, and our Mo Rocca may have the winner.
Oh.
James Buchanan, outhouse for 5. You could have a whole cabinet meeting in here.
A family that goes together.
Warren Harding.
He was good.
You want to shake hands with the hand that shook hands with Harding?
Wow. No survey of forgotten presidents. So Miller Fillmore's lips were on that teacup.
Yes.
Would be complete without our 17th president, Andrew Johnson.
Do some people come in thinking it's Andrew Jackson?
Oh, lots of times, absolutely.
Andrew Johnson's presidency would end in disgrace. But in 1864, when Republican President Abraham Lincoln was running for re-election during the Civil War and needed a running mate who'd balance the ticket, Tennessee's Andrew Johnson was his pick.
He was something politically that really wasn't even supposed to exist. He was a union-supporting Southern Democrat.
Right.
It's kind of like Sasquatch. You know, I've heard you exist, but I've never seen one.
Right.
I am loving that banner, Lincoln Sasquatch 64.
Really?
Burke Greer is a ranger at the Andrew Johnson National Historic Site in Greenville,
Tennessee.
Lots of things with his name on it here.
where you'll find the Andrew Johnson Bank, the Andrew Johnson Highway, the Andrew Johnson Inn.
He is always, for this town, going to be the local boy does good story.
Is this town still proud of it?
Absolutely.
Johnson was a tailor here before he ran for office.
Right.
They would constantly need to keep heating different irons.
And his shop, the original still stands, became a place for everyday people to talk politics.
His people were the yeomen, the good, solid, working people of Eastern Tennessee. He stood for public schools. He stood for public libraries. He liked state fairs. Anything to give the working man a leg up.
Johnson's backstory, says historian Howard Means, was every bit as raw as the rail splitters.
If Lincoln and Johnson were competing in the humble Olympics, who would come away with the gold?
I think Johnson would have. His father died when he was 3 years old. It was a penniless family. He had basically no education. His wife taught him to write when he was in his early 20s.
Which made his political ascent all the more stunning. From town alderman all the way up to vice president, he didn't lose a single election. But on the very day Lincoln delivered his iconic second inaugural address, Johnson had a little too much whiskey.
He was drunk.
He rambled really drunkenly for about 7, 8 minutes. He's reeling around some. He's filled with a rage, basically, criticizing the ambassadors who were there as, as highborn and all that sort of stuff.
Still, there were high hopes for Johnson after the shock of Lincoln's assassination just 5 weeks later on Good Friday.
Yeah.
When you look at sermons that were preached Easter Sunday, many northern churches talked about the nation being delivered at the right moment to the man who could do the job.
That's right.
It was set for this guy to be a savior.
Yeah, precisely.
But the task ahead of Johnson may have been the most daunting any president has ever faced.
It's impossible to conceive of the America of 1865 when Johnson took office.
Oh.
You're trying to heal the wounds of a 4-year war with 600,000 people dead. There are 4 million freed slaves in the South, in a country of 30 million people.
Johnson wanted the post-war South treated leniently. As for the fate of freed slaves, he wanted that left up to the states. But many of his so-called radical Republican opponents wanted to punish the secessionists and guarantee civil and voting rights to freedmen.
Well, of course.
The clash led to crisis, with the president all but declaring war on Congress. In his Washington birthday speech in 1866, he declaimed, "They may slander me, but let me say I do not intend to be bullied by my enemies." Did he take things personally?
Yes, he was very thin-skinned. He took just about everything personally. He remembered taunts and jeers from decades gone by. He never forgot the sound of somebody criticizing him.
The more you would try to get him to open up and listen to a different side of thinking, the further back he would go, almost to being like petulant, if you will, almost like a child. He would just ball up and not really want to hear anything you have to say.
Despite the personal pleas of abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass, Johnson vetoed major bills that would have helped former slaves. Congress overrode him. Finally, the bad blood spilled over. The president was impeached and escaped removal from office by just one vote.
On the wall here is the impeachment ticket. If you went to the impeachment trial, you bought a ticket for every day.
At the Greene County History Museum, Betty Fletcher is the keeper of all things Andrew Johnson, including tickets to his 1868 impeachment.
Let's talk about Bill Clinton's impeachment.
Very valuable. Took the complete set.
Well, those are pretty great, unless you're the guy being impeached. He's not a success as president. How do you explain that to people?
I don't know who would have been a success right then, right there. Lincoln may have had a little easier road to hoe just because of his political savvy, but I certainly don't think it would have been smooth sailing even for Lincoln.
His mind is so complex.
At the National Portrait Gallery in Washington, Abraham Lincoln is prominently placed, casting a shadow on his much less popular successor.
How do you think he'd feel about being stuck in the corner? I mean, Lincoln's where all the traffic is.
He wouldn't like it. I don't think he'd
Thin
like
skin.
it. Even Buchanan gets a better spot over there. But
That's an insult.
That's an insult, I would say.
That kid becomes your responsibility.
Still to come,
But that never happened.
Oscar-nominated actor.
So, I'm going to comment briefly about Andrew Johnson here. Put on my... There it is. I've got my MAGA hat just to let you know what's going on. So, what I would say to you is Andrew Johnson was a Democrat, and I cannot tell you how many people I've confronted who did not know that. Abraham Lincoln had to balance the ticket because he needed a Union fusion ticket. Republicans lost seats in Congress in 1862. And if Republicans didn't have any power in the legislature, it would have been very difficult for him to continue the Civil War. That's why post-1862, you will hear Abraham Lincoln talking about keeping the Union together along with ending slavery. Because politically, he needed to have enough power in Congress as well as within himself as an executive to continue to prosecute the war. A lot of people are not aware of these details, but they're essential for understanding how Abraham Lincoln, our 16th president, was able to endure and prosecute the peace through the American Civil War. Andrew Johnson was a Democrat. He was not a Republican. It's amazing to me the ignorance I've met from a lot of liberals who say, oh, Andrew Johnson they think he was one of those racist Republicans. He was a Democrat. And notice it was a Democrat who vetoed legislation expanding the franchise to African Americans, allowing them to have 40 acres and a mule. Democrats did that, but Republicans controlled Congress in sufficient number post-Civil War that they were able to override all of his vetoes. So something else to keep in mind too, you'll notice that in the interview or in the historical record there, they talk about Eastern Tennessee. That's where Andrew Johnson was from. Most people are aware that West Virginia ended up seceding from the secessionist state of Virginia. Eastern Tennessee almost did the same thing because you had a lot of poor mountaineers, tailors, working poor in that part of the state who actually resented the plantation aristocracy, the plantation plutocracy, the plantation kleptocracy, which exploited working poor, by pushing them out of jobs and having slaves doing all the work for nothing. So there was a lot of resentment against the wealthy and the upper crust and the upper class, and that's what animated a lot of Andrew Johnson's policies. So I wanted to add that in addition to the presentation that was given by Sunday Morning this morning. Happy President's Day weekend. Happy President's Day weekend.